We're currently in a moment of heightened awareness and struggle over immigration policy in the United States. This intensification was triggered by the discovery that part of Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy was to separate and detain children apart from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. Immediately, people recognized this policy for what it was, a deliberate and barbaric strategy for deterring people who are fleeing desperate circumstances from trying to enter the U.S. Videos and pictures surfaced, as well as testimony from inside detention centers of horrific treatment and neglect inflicted on migrant adults and children alike by ICE and Border Patrol agents. Nursing babies ripped from their mothers, toddlers locked up in cages, children drugged, abused, and made to fend for themselves in court. This cruel policy sheds light on the absurdity of rhetoric from the corporate media that criticizes immigrants for not coming in the legal way. Many of the families split apart, in fact, tried to enter the U.S. through the legal mechanisms in place for refugees, but were denied entry and criminalized when they presented themselves after crossing the border. For many people in this country, this has been a revelation of the terroristic capacities of the American state. Social media absolutely erupted with outrage. Even significant elements of Trump's base condemned the cruelty of these practices. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets and gathered in city centers and at local ICE facilities and detention centers across the country to demonstrate our opposition. The Party for Socialism and Liberation, as well as the Answer Coalition, has been at the front line of these protests, not only in the Southwest, but across the country. Protests in Portland captured national attention when hundreds of demonstrators showed up at the local ICE office and refused to let employees leave. The ICE employees pleading to be let through to their cars drew a sharp irony as they complained that they needed to get home to their families. A number of protesters set up camp outside the building and demanded the permanent closure of the facility. Similar encampments sprung up at ICE facilities across the country, including in New York, Detroit, LA, Philadelphia, and other cities. President Trump issued an executive order in response to the public outcry, supposedly changing his administration's policy. But the order merely states that the updated policy is to, quote, maintain family unity, including by detaining alien families together where appropriate and consistent with law and available resources. To take this as a victory would require us to accept the continued abuse and detention of immigrants, granted that it's inflicted on them as family units. And even that is not guaranteed. Of course, the deportation machine we see today was not built by Trump. The militarization of the border and the extensive deportation agencies are products of the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations, and both major parties and their corporate backers have long accepted such inhumanity as the price of U.S. global supremacy. This is not even to mention this country's long tradition of separating children from their families, from the shores of Africa, at slave markets, Native American children sent to boarding schools, the mass incarceration of poor people and people of color. So yes, Trump is a disgusting racist, but to make this about one individual or one party exonerates the entire class of corporations and owners that collude in the terrorism abroad and at the border that enables them to make their profits.
That's right.
This capitalist class has built its wealth off the backs of the world's poor and oppressed, and they rely on the American state to maintain their system of exploitation by any means necessary. The sudden media spotlight also neglects the cause of the majority of migration across the U.S.-Mexico border. In South and Central America alone, the U.S. has made over 56 military interventions. Through violently suppressing people's movements, imposing sanctions and blockades, assassinating threatening activists and politicians, backing fascists, and training and arming opposition groups, the United States terrorizes Latin America to maintain its global dominance and its access to cheap labor and resources. Then, when the consequences show up at the border in the form of refugees, the state cages them or turns them away to die, or lets a certain number in, only to be demonized and given access to the lowest quality housing, education, and work opportunities. So clearly our fight cannot stop here. There are still hundreds of children that have not been returned to their parents, and the system that ceaselessly produces refugees and oppresses immigrants is still in place. We're inspired and encouraged by the massive protests that have swept the country, and we cannot let this energy be co-opted back into the Democratic Party, into the same system responsible for these atrocities. We've seen how they use immigrant lives as bargaining chips in their internal struggles for power, as in their shameful failure to advocate for DACA recipients. At best, they can offer more humane detention centers, measured deportations, and softer military interventions. We need to organize our own party, one of and by working people, that will fight for real justice in our communities. We must continue the fight to keep families together, but it can't just mean jail them together. And when we call to abolish ICE, that has to mean the full abolition of the detention and deportation machine.
That's right.
Ultimately, the entire capitalist system has to go. We fight for a future where instead of spending billions of dollars on warfare, militarizing the border, and caging families, the enormous wealth of this country can be used to guarantee the basic needs of every person, regardless of where they were born. We need socialism, and we must organize to make our demands real. No more detentions, no more deportations, no war, and full rights for immigrants. Thank you.